Bitcoin Part 1: Transactions and UXTOs. Most Bitcoin tutorials start explaining mining, proof of work, consensus, and how the blocks are linked together in an immutable way. Here, we're going to do the reverse. We will start with the smallest building block of the Bitcoin blockchain, a transaction, and then work our way back out in this series of videos. I think it makes much more intuitive sense this way. I find it helpful to think about a Bitcoin transaction as a paper check. Each check has a transaction ID, and the recipient, also called an output, is a Bitcoin address, which, if you remember, is just a hash of the recipient's public key. All the Bitcoins you have is basically just the sum of the whole stack of paper checks that you've been given. In the real world, you will deposit the check at a bank, and if it is valid, the money will be added to the balance in your bank account. However, Bitcoin is not an account-based system. What this means is that it is missing the step where you deposit your paper checks into some kind of Bitcoin account and have it reflected in the balance. You simply own the stack of paper checks that you've been given, and you only use them when you want to spend the coins and send money to someone else. Let's say Alice has a stack of 5 checks that others gave to her. You can tell they are hers because the output shows the hash of Alice's public key, which is essentially her Bitcoin address. Each of these checks have a transaction ID. To send Bob 0.2 Bitcoins, Alice needs to write a new check by filling in the following fields. Output should be the hash of Bob's public key. The amount should be 0.2. But what do we put for input? Where's the money coming from? There's no account balance to subtract from, but Alice does have a stack of checks that other people gave to her, so she can just use up one of her checks by writing down the transaction ID of the check that she wants to use. But there's a problem here. The check that Alice wants to use gives her 1 Bitcoin, but she only wants to send Bob 0.2 Bitcoins. Where does the rest of the 0.8 coins go? Well, Alice remembers that she also wants to send Mark 0.3 Bitcoins, so on this transaction, she can create a second output with Mark's address with a value of 0.3. But that still doesn't add up to 1, and she doesn't have anyone else to send the money to at this time. What does Alice do? She can add a third output to give the change back to herself. The third output address is her own Bitcoin address, and the amount is set to 0.49. Since this transaction has 3 outputs, it also has an index field here, 0, 1, and 2. The next time Mark wants to spend these 0.3 Bitcoins, he can refer to this money he's been given by Alice by using the transaction ID combined with this index number. But that still doesn't add up. There is 0.01 Bitcoins unaccounted for. Well, when the input is greater than the sum of the outputs, the transaction is deemed valid, and the difference is something like a tip to the volunteers who are contributing their machines to keep the Bitcoin protocol running. The higher your tip, the faster your transactions will be picked up and processed. You will notice that Alice has already spent some of her checks. We'll call each of these checks outputs, and checks that she can still use are called unspent transaction outputs, or UXTOs in short. UXTOs is a core concept in Bitcoin and many other protocols. Now, Alice wants to buy an expensive virtual house worth 5 Bitcoins, but now she runs into the opposite problem. She doesn't have any UXTOs with 5 or more Bitcoins. Well, just like we can have multiple inputs on a transaction, we can also have multiple inputs on a transaction. So all she needs to do is to write 2 inputs with 2 references to UXTOs, and as long as the sum of these 2 UXTOs that she owns adds up to more than 5 Bitcoins, she's good to go. In the world of cryptocurrencies, we obviously don't have physical pieces of paper to serve as paper checks. Instead, we have a big centralized list that everyone can read and keeps track of an append-only log of all transactions. So, what is to stop a bad guy from creating a transaction that uses Alice's UXTOs as the input? Well, one of the things I didn't mention is that when you issue a transaction, Alice needs to use her secret key to sign the transaction. This step verifies that the UXTO she is using as input, or the funding source if you like, really does belong to Alice because she has the secret key. There is a time gap from Alice making her transaction public and it being confirmed on the blockchain. So during this gap, what is to stop bad guys from stealing the coins that Alice is sending to Bob by editing her transaction by replacing Bob's address with his own before it is confirmed onto the blockchain? Well, remember Alice had to use her secret key to sign this transaction. And recall from the previous digital signatures video, signing a transaction means that the signature has embedded in it a hash of the details of this transaction. If a bad guy edited the transaction after Alice has signed it, when the Bitcoin system tries to verify Alice's signature against the transaction, it will fail because the transaction has changed compared to the version that Alice signed. What we have described is just only one of 5 types of transactions that is possible on the Bitcoin blockchain. One person sending money to another person. It's not that impressive since we can already do that even without cryptocurrencies. But in the next video, we will learn about Bitcoin scripting and how you can program additional logic into the transactions that determine who can get your money programmatically. I find it really incredible how someone came up with this. Click subscribe below so you don't miss the next one.